Yeah, 20.
There you go.
Great.
Everybody hooked up?
You did the first one, I hope.
I did.
We're ready. Okay, Mark. Let's begin the December 1st meeting of the Utility Commission Strategic Planning Committee. Jason Gray, oh, excuse me, I didn't get a agenda.
Okay.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Donahue?
Here.
Mr. Turpin?
Here.
Mr. Shanks?
Here.
Mr. Gilstrap?
Here.
Dr. Miller?
Here.
Jason Gray is going to, thank you. Thanks. Jason Gray is going to follow up with information from questions from our November 17th meeting. Jason.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be referring to the follow-up question PowerPoint that you got in your handout. Several questions were raised last meeting. First one was non-operating revenue. What was included in that? If you look into the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund balance, the large Excel spreadsheet, it lists in detail what's listed under non-operating revenue. There's 5 line items: interest income on investments, the energy efficiency recoveries and rebates, gains loss on disposal, job and income loss. So those 5 items make up non-operating revenue.
Question.
Sure.
The interest on investments, is that bond money that's invested, parked, or what is that?
It's interest made on bond money. Is that correct, Jenny?
Yes.
It's basically the bond money invested.
It's also interest on the reserves in the
Unrestricted.
That's probably the bigger portion of it.
Right.
Okay.
Question. Jobbing income. Some years it's a lot, it's plus, and some years it's negative. What's the difference?
Jobbing is from any expense that we're supposed to recover the expense from. It could be a vehicle accident. It could be any number of cases. What's some more examples of jobbing?
And it might be that the expenses are recognized in one fiscal year and the revenue in the next, creating the
Okay.
loss.
So it's money that is occurred, but we're expected to be paid back for that expense.
Okay.
Let me ask a question that might be able to start a little discussion of this. This is different from when we move power lines for road construction done by the state.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
It is.
And that has a particular...
That's contribution in aid.
Contribution in aid. Those are larger projects.
Right.
The jobbing income that we're talking about here, these are where the Danville Power and Light does work for commercial people.
It
Is
could
that
be.
fair to say that?
It could be, but it's like if a car hits a pole and we have to seek recovery of those expenses from insurance company, something like that.
So it's where you're going to have a transaction
Right.
that's going to reimburse you for a cost.
Right.
And sometimes it's not as Ms. Finney said, it's not in the same period. And I would like to say to the members of the council, sometimes we have very large payments of these contributions and aids, particularly like, for instance, in the Franklin Turnpike, widening of Franklin Turnpike several years ago. There was a lot of money that was spent to put up those new metal poles in one period, and the money was not received to the other. I mean, this was hundreds of thousands of dollars. So And it does distort the P&L for that period.
And that would be a VDOT project contribution.
Right,
in
yeah,
aid.
big government.
Right.
So council.
Okay, go ahead.
Another question that came up was the fund balance, the unrestricted fund balance for the previous years, and I'm referring to retained earnings analysis, electric fund. Shows 5 years. These are fiscal years at the end of June 30th. And the last line says unrestricted. It shows the balance of the unrestricted electric unrestricted fund for each year. So we're roughly around 30 million for each year, plus or minus. Yes, sir.
This would have been better asked last week, but the 2013, 2014, we set aside money for stranded cost, $3 million.
That's in the restricted, the line above it. Restricted.
That's restricted. And my question is, if we set, now we set aside 6 million of the, what, it was 9 or 12 million that we think is going to be
We set
spent?
aside $3 million.
So we haven't, all right, we have two columns, 13 and 14.
Well, it's 3 million, it's carried over.
That's just a carryover, okay. Now, is that reflected in the calculation that we used to come up with the power cost adjustment?
No, it isn't. We have not used that money.
So this is to the good, I mean, we're collecting on the power cost adjustment to help with that, but we also have this money as well.
That's correct.
And it seemed to me when we did that in 2013, it was intended to happen. Philip, could you help me? Was it intended to happen annually, the $3 million?
No, it was, we knew that we were going to have about a $5 million hit, and we didn't know exactly when it was going to be, but we figured it was going to be in the 14 year. At that time, there was about a $3 million surplus above the minimum, and that's when we talked about putting this money aside, knowing that it was going to happen at some point, but we didn't know exactly when.
But our goal at the time, well, Utility Commission's goal at the time was to be able to set some aside each year. Is that correct?
Well, at that time, we were just trying, I was trying to capture that surplus and protect it against this future liability because we knew it was coming.
Right.
There was no doubt we were going to pay it.
Right.
And there was extra money in reserve, and we could set it aside for that purpose.
Right.
Not knowing exactly when it would happen. But that was all we could do because that's all the extra we had. And I don't think we have much extra now.
Right.
Plus, we have another, there's a possibility that we will owe a little more on the stranded cost. And I think we discussed this about 3 months ago in the Utility Commission meeting, that we would leave it in there where it is now and see what happens in the spring. And if we have to pay more, we can just take this money, transfer it to that payment, and we won't have to have another rate adjustment.
Power cost adjustment.
Because we've already taken care of the first part of the stranded cost problem.
So after the, excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So after the transfer out, we have of 2014, we have a net income of $5 million. What happens to that?
It can be used towards capital projects for the upcoming budget year.
Within the utilities?
Just one more question. But the stranded cost now, is that the same stranded cost we have in the suit? If we are successful, we won't have to pay that?
That's correct.
But we're assuming we put aside the money to have it available if we do need to pay.
We're looking at worst case scenario.
Worst case.
If there's a settlement or
Right.
This money was first the intention was to put this aside for the 5.8 million.
Right.
But but that's been rolled up into the rates already.
Right.
That's part of the PCA. Everything got rolled up in the spring and in March, and so all of that has already been accounted for in terms of rates.
that's
Right.
I'm confused because it seemed to me that $3 million should have been used to keep from having as large a PCA adjustment.
Go ahead.
the
Mr.
Utility Commission discussed it a few months ago and decided not to.
Mr. Turpin?
Yeah, we discussed maybe crediting that to the PCA, but decided not to do it, pending all these unknown, more additional stranded costs.
Okay.
Jason?
The next question that came up was the electric fund debt service, and should be the next sheet in your packet. It shows you the past 5 years principal and interest, as well as what we think the next 5 years looks like. These are just based on our 5-year capital plan. Any questions on the debt service?
Let me start off by asking, does this assume that there'll be any borrowing in the next 5 years?
It depends on the budget, and
Do these numbers assume any borrowing?
This is actual.
So it does not assume any new borrowing.
This is our actual debt service schedule. No, it doesn't.
This is the 5-year CIP,
Yes, it is.
and no borrowings included?
No.
Well,
Okay.
perhaps to correct, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
this is the 5-year principal and interest payback. But it's not it's not the capital improvement plan.
That's right.
But to the extent that the CIP does not include any further borrowing, there was no projection made of any borrowing on this sheet of paper.
That's correct.
That's correct.
We're looking at a static number.
That's
That's what I was trying to get at. Okay. Thank you.
Existing debt.
Right. Existing debt service.
Question was asked about Prairie State, about how efficient Prairie State is compared to other coal plants. An analysis was given to me, given Prairie State's carbon emissions compared to the state of Illinois and the requirements for 2030. Prairie State is a mine mount design, which means that the coal mine is right beside the plant, so there's no need for railing in coal, and that lowers the carbon emissions output for the plant. The carbon emissions pounds per megawatt hour is 2,000. The 2012 requirement was 2,300 pounds, and the 2030 requirement is 2,200 pounds. So right now, Prairie State is meeting, really exceeding the mark.
That's great.
The last question the second to the last question I have was about the PJM board and how they're elected. There are 9 board members on PJM. 7 of them have requirements as far as how they're elected. They have to have expertise and knowledge of transmission and energy. 2 of them have to have expertise in just energy, but they cannot be a member of energy consortium or a utility. They cannot be tied to any utility company whatsoever. I'm trying to get a list of the current members now and be glad to provide that to you. But 2 of the seats are up for re-election, and Danville is currently not a voting member, but AMP is a voting member for Danville. Danville is not a member of PJM right now, but we are a member. We are a member of AMP who is voting on our behalf.
Okay, so that begs the question, we kind of touched on it last meeting. Can Danville be a non-member of PJM?
We can be a voting member of
I mean, can we get out of PJM?
No.
Because of our affiliation with AMP or because of some other reason?
Because of we're relying on AEP for our transmission. And AEP is a transmission operator within
Gotcha.
PJM.
Okay.
It's a state decision.
And that's what we rely on someone else.
It'd be cheaper.
Mr. King, would you like to discuss the property tax comparison you provided?
There's a list of, well, do you want to go over the rates first?
I'll do that after.
Okay. There's a list of the 39 cities in Virginia and the 2012 real property tax rates. This is published every year by the Virginia Auditor of Public Accounts, and there's an extensive report online every year about expenditures and revenues for all cities and counties. And this just shows you where Danville is relative to the other 38 cities in Virginia for the real estate, the real property tax rate. 2012 is the earliest or the latest numbers they publish. Our tax rate has not changed, so it's currently 73 cents per hundred.
But we don't know that these other rates have,
We don't
especially
know.
those that are lower than we don't know if they've increased or
Right.
not.
That's correct.
Any questions? Last thing I have to go over is the utility rate comparison. Doug Hanley, who was our previous rate consultant, compiled this information for us. It gives a residential comparison with AEP, Duke, Dominion, Bedford, Mecklenburg, Martinsville, as well as other customer classes, small general, large general, medium general, and it tells you their consumption at the top and where we fall.
And when was this prepared?
This was prepared, these are July 2014. The question came up at last meeting, where are our rates compared to cooperatives and IOUs? And this is why I'm presenting this information.
This is very helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else?
As part of the rate study, there'll be an updated rate comparison figure, and one of the things our rate consultant will do is make sure that we're looking at all charges. So there's a customer charge, every utility has a customer charge that's a flat monthly charge. There's a consumption charge for everybody. In our case, above small general service, there's a demand and a consumption charge. And so they'll look at in taxes as well.
And the taxes change by jurisdiction,
Right.
obviously.
So they'll compare the jurisdictions that we normally benchmark against, and normally we look at the surrounding providers, whether they're public or public power or investor-owned utilities. And so you'll see the most current information that is comparing apples and apples with all those different components as part of the rate structure.
Mr. King, I think I mentioned earlier, you think we'll be able to break those comparisons down between the wholesale power cost and the distribution cost of the each entity?
Yes,
We can?
yes, we can.
Okay.
So you wanna-
Essentially, yeah.
You want to break them down by generation, transmission, and distribution? Is that how you want to see them?
For all of them, that'll be good.
We can't do that by customer class because there's no way to distinguish those elements by customer class, but we can by total power purchased versus power delivered. We can break it down by the wholesale power costs, the distribution costs, and anything else.
Can you do the transmission cost?
Yes.
Those are let me ask you this way. Are those the three most important identifiable costs you have?
Yes.
There's nothing else you'd want to include in there? That's
Right.
retrievable, that you can absolutely identify those numbers?
We can do that for our own utility. We can't do it for the comparison utilities.
Or you can't.
That data just isn't available from the other utilities.
It's not publicly available. It's not publicly available.
Yeah, that's the problem is that the data's not available to the general public.
I would thought the private firms through the State Corporation Commission would have that information.
We may be able to glean that out of their reports, but I'm afraid if we're trying to compare apples to apples, it's going to be difficult to do that looking at those kinds of documents. Because you can't guarantee a consistency in reporting, even though they may be reporting to authorities, the same authorities, we just can't verify that.
Well, you all continue to think about that and get back to us with what you think is doable.
And you would like to see that as part of the rate study when it's presented?
That'd be fine. Is that all right with you? Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
All in one place. Does anybody else have anything?
Where would you like the profit shown? I mean, there is a delta between cost of service and total fees. Do you want them to include that in the distribution cost?
Sure. I was thinking we were just looking at a cost of the cost is what Mr. Turple was going through earlier, but please include that. You can make that last calculation for us too. And that'll give us the profit.
We'll put it with the distribution cost.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because, basically that goes back into the general fund plus the cost of operating the utility and maintaining it.
It's an important number to know because of the way we're going to calculate the reserve in the future too. I mean, I think that's what we got out of last Monday. Is We're going to have a little different way of calculating the reserve, so we need to know a little more than we knew before, data-wise. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Jason, are we going to now introduce the people from Homefront?
I would like to,
Can we wait just for a minute?
sure.
I'm just looking at these numbers on the residential electric bill amounts, and I'm glad you presented those. And, because we had gotten some other information. And according to what I see here, this was as of July 2014, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And when I look at AEP, that would be who serves our county. Duke would be across the state boundary. And then you've got Progress Energy, which is serving Northern Virginia. VEPCO would be Dominion.
Right.
Progress
see
is
the-
North Carolina.
Pardon me?
Progress is North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Together.
Okay, thank you. And so VEPCO, you see the impact of their rate increase that was passed and that they received in 2013 and that difference in rates. Okay. And then we've got Bedford, which is, Martinsville and Mecklenburg, which are all
Mecklenburg being a co-op.
the co-op,
And then Bedford and Martinsville being AMP members as well.
AMP members like we are. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to welcome Tim Blodgett from Hometown Connections. Traveled all the way from Colorado, but they're here to help us with our organizational checkup and strategic plan, and they have a presentation for us, which you have in your handout. So with that, Tim.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you to the steering committee. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to working with your utility here. Also want to introduce my colleague, Steve Vandermeer, who's with us today as well, and we're going to split the presentation up a little bit. I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about Hometown, answer any questions as far as who we are, and then let Steve address the committee as it relates to what we're going to be up to here in the next 2 months in what we call our organization checkup, and then our strategic planning assistance that we're going to provide after the first of the year. I believe you have a handout with 14 slides in it, and so stop me if you've got any questions. The second slide that you'll see there is our values proposition, a little bit about who we are, and that is we're owned by Public Power. We are a subsidiary of the American Public Power Association out of DC. We actually reside in Colorado, not in DC, but we're owned by the American Public Power Association, and we work closely with them. We've got relationships with partners out there that I've got a list of on the next slide, of which Utility Financial Solutions, who we're working as a sub to for this project, is one of our partners. And then we've got relationships with joint action agencies and state associations. Most of the state associations and joint action agencies around the country we have an affiliation and relationship with. And AMP is one of our partners as well, and just wanted to point that out. Through our years, we've had the opportunity to work with multiple utilities around the country in our 17 years of existence, or we're in our 17th year. And so we've got a lot of best practice knowledge, and that's what we're going to be bringing here to Danville Utilities. And then we hope once this is wrapped up, not only through the process, but afterwards as well, we could be an ongoing resource for the utility here. And again, being able to network and as well as provide information on any topic out there that we can be of assistance with. The next slide, slide 3, gives a little bit about our history and brings us up to date. We were created in 1998. Again, we are a resource to Public Power, as mentioned earlier. We were formed back with the onslaught and the threat of electric deregulation back in the late 90s. And although the retail deregulation side didn't come to fruition in most areas, our premise has remained the same, and that is aggregating up the purchasing power for Public Power outside of power supply. We do not work in the power supply realm as far as in the market itself. And the reason for that was the joint action agencies did not want us competing with them when we were created by their trade association. But we work in all other spaces out there. And as you look to date, we have saved Public Power over $16 million in direct purchases, and that's through our product and service discounts that we have out there through our various partners. There's really two sides to our business. One is what we're going to be doing here, which is our consulting side, and then the other side is our third-party product endorsement side of that. And that's what you see there. Again, we've worked with over 850 utilities, over 100 in the consulting area that we'll be providing support to on this project. And then you can see the partnerships that we have there through the 14 industry experts listed there, of which Utility Financial Solutions is one of those. So I wanted to set that up, tee that up as far as who we are, and again, thank the steering committee and thank Jason for having us and Joe for having us. And if there's no other questions for me, I'd like to Steve to come up and talk about what we're going to be kicking off tomorrow, which is the organization checkup process, and have him talk to that. We'll be on site for 2 days through an interview process with all staff, or at least various staff members, not only from the utility, I believe, but also from the city side as well, and the supportings. We like to talk to everybody that supports the utility as we go through this process. Any questions right now for me? Okay, Steve?
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to be here this afternoon, and the opportunity to not be moving through space in a plane or a rental car or a shuttle bus. Tim and I were at the airport this morning at about 3 a.m. to get here, and a little bit of a glitch getting here, but nice to be here. Nice to be in this beautiful building here. This is really an impressive space that you operate in, and inspiring to say the least. Wanted to talk a little bit about what Hometown is talking with Danville about over the coming days and the coming weeks in terms of some of the consulting services that we provide and how we are envisioning these pieces coming together and hopefully in service to the Danville utilities and addressing some of the important questions that you're asking and that staff is asking and that citizens are asking about the future of the utility and how it can best serve the needs of the community. We're starting out tomorrow with what we call the organization Checkup, and really it's a third-party review of a utility, and you know we offer it and call it the organization Checkup. On the water side, you may have heard of a process called QualServe that's been around for many years, where it's peer review by water utility professionals that come in. We did not find a comparable service on the electric side when Hometown Connections was formed, and there are certainly other consultants out there that do this, but with Hometown Connections focus strictly on public power, and the fact, as Tim noted, that we have interacted in one form or another with over 800 of the 2,000 public power utilities around the country. We're in a good position with Hometown staff to really talk about what we've seen elsewhere, best practices, how we see other utilities address similar situations that we're in. Not to say we won't find anything unique here in Danville. We always do find something unique, but we always love to come to utilities and have the opportunity to see how things are run and where we can offer up comparisons to other utilities and what that looks like. Our approach may or may not be unique, but we try and very much take a whole systems approach to the utility operations. We don't want to come in and drill down deeply into any one space. We don't represent ourselves as experts in any one space. I know you had Dawn Lund in recently from Utility Financial Solutions, and I would call Dawn an expert when it comes to the financial operations of an electric utility. We certainly work with UFS, and I can talk intelligibly for a few minutes before I run out of things to say when it comes to the utility side or the financial side of a utility. But what we do offer is what we hope we're offering is a very broad perspective on how the different pieces of the utility fit together. And in some cases, and probably the case here in Danville, how pieces from outside the utility fit in as well. And specifically that could be general fund operations, whether it's HR or purchasing, or in this case governance, where you have a city council that's acting as a governing board to the utility. I'm sure, as you know, in many cases, utilities will have independent boards, and while there's pros and cons to each of those, they each bring a slightly different values proposition to the table. So for us, when we're talking about the organization Checkup, it's really how all the pieces fit together. And on that slide, we want to make clear that it's not only the utility, but there could be general fund operations, there could be joint action agency input, there could be state association involvement, especially if there are legal issues going on in the state capitol that could impact the utility. But for all of that, our goal is to make real clear that it should all be done in service to the customer. That's the reason the utility exists. It was probably the reason that the utility was formed, in your case, over 100 years ago, was to provide the customer, initially in Danville, but in your case more broadly into a larger community, to add value. How can you add value, and how do you provide a viable alternative to what might be something that folks don't feel that same level of representation with, or that same level of value from their utility. We do these organization checkups, and Tim and I between us have done probably over 50 of them now. We like to work in pairs just because the 2 days that we're on site tend to be very rapid fire, and Tim and I come from very different backgrounds, and I don't know, Jason, if our bios were shared with the committee or not, but we'd happy to provide our bios. Tim does come out of the investor road side and the gas utility, and has a great deal of knowledge in the technology side and the customer information side. I actually came out of local government, master's in public administration from the University of Pennsylvania, and initially worked as the assistant to the city manager for the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, before I moved over to the electric utility. where I was the Director of Marketing and Energy Services there. Interestingly, Tim and I both joined Hometown Connections in its initial year of inception in 1998, and we've been there ever since. I think for both of us, it's probably one of our great passions in life is to provide assistance to public power. Clearly, the highlight of my time with public power is when I have the opportunity to travel to utilities and meet with the folks there, and in any way I can add value. And I'm sure that that's similar to what's going on with Tim. We see a lot of reasons for folks doing these things, and you know, in your case, you've got some of these will certainly ring true with you. Competitive challenges as a starting place for strategic planning or strategic thinking. Prioritizing limited resources, coming in and helping the utility focus on those key issues, especially if they are working in a constrained environment as far as resources go. Introducing new ideas and benchmarks against other utilities. And I think one of the things that Hometown does well at is acting as a bellwether to changes that are occurring within public power. And that may be technology changes, it may be changes in the way business is done. And so it's an opportunity for us to come in and share with what we've seen elsewhere. We frequently will come in when there's been a change in management, and the manager uses it as an opportunity for them and staff to quickly gain a broad sense of what's happening in the utility and how all the different pieces work together and support each other or perhaps not support each other. And finally is to learn from others' best practices. I think that's one of the things that we really try and bring this to. There's a lot of reasons that your timing is good. I've been with Hometown now for 16 years and was with the city of Fort Collins for 11 years before that. And looking at the electric utility industry, what we thought were going to be some of the most turbulent times we could imagine back in the late 90s actually ended up not being turbulent at all, because much of the talk of deregulation really did not take place in the way we thought it would. Interestingly, the changes are far more far-reaching now than anything we've seen in the time we've been with Hometown Connections. And certainly technology is one of the drivers of that, not only in the way that you provide electricity, but I think technology has changed the way that customers expect to interact with the businesses they deal with, in terms of access to information 24/7, in terms of the ability to get answers to their questions or to pay a bill or to request a service that may not involve them picking up a phone or coming into the utility offices. So certainly there are technology changes that are driving a lot, but there are also demographic changes that I think are twofold that are having a huge impact on the electric utility industry. The first is impacting all of us, and that is simply the changing demographics of the customers that we serve. You know, English as a second language is becoming increasingly an issue, and with a name like Vandermeer, I grew up in Michigan where there's a lot of Dutch people, and there's no more Dutch community than Holland, Michigan, which is also a public power town. I was in Holland, it's probably been 15 years ago now, and was talking to the manager there, and he noted that they are now 25% Hispanic there, and a sizable population of their customers now, English is their second language. And that's primarily due to the fact that the agricultural community around them has brought in a lot of migrant labor, and they've had to adapt to the demographic changes that have occurred in their community in particular, but I think it's affecting everybody in every corner of the country right now. The other demographic change that's affecting the utility industry in particular is the aging of its population. The Bureau of Labor Statistics did a study that's several years old now, but the data is still every bit as valid, and perhaps even more so, that showed by industry the percentage of employees within that industry that were 55 years or older. Easily the oldest industry out there is the utility industry. And I'm sure you're seeing that here. To some degree, we see it in virtually every community that we work with, and that is the aging of the workforce in the utility industry and the potential loss of the intellectual capital in that. Combined with that loss of intellectual capital are the challenges of finding new people to come in and take that work. It's the city government, and in particular utility jobs have always been very attractive work for people, very stable, good benefits, a long-term work opportunity for people. But getting back to those demographics and the changes in the way people think about their careers, We see career changes becoming far, far more common. We see the reasons for people taking jobs evolving over time. And with it, we're seeing public power electric utilities struggling greatly with bringing in a wide range of skilled positions into their communities. And that's a challenge that a lot of public power communities are dealing with right now. We'll probably learn more about in the next couple of days while we're here as well. So there's a lot of good reasons for why this is a good time to be looking at your organization and taking a hard look at how you will continue to serve the communities that you're serving now and how you can improve upon that. And we certainly hope that the organization checkup process that we provide is something we can do toward that end. Now, Tim referenced that we've got both the organization checkup and also the strategic planning piece coming up as part of your larger assessment of the utility's future. And certainly we see the organization checkup used as a launching pad for strategic planning. We've done this with a few utilities now, where if you really want to think about it, the organization checkup, if nothing else, is a SWOT analysis, which is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which is a key foundational component to most strategic planning efforts. And so by coming in and doing an organization checkup now, it provides a great deal of information, perspectives and recommendation, and opportunities for discussion, and not only within staff, but within the governing board and the advisory board as well, in terms of what are going to be the important issues that we should be focusing on if we continue to expect to serve these communities that we serve well. So from that standpoint, there's a real strong tie-in between what we will be doing in the next couple of days with the organization checkup and how that would feed into any future strategic planning effort that you have underway. Because I think it does give everybody a common frame of reference and a common language to speak to as they move forward on that strategic planning effort. So for us, and this is just our process, I mentioned there are lots of ways to do this. Interestingly, while there's no one doing this in public power within the public power community nationally, we have learned that Florida Municipal Electric Association, in conjunction with the Florida Municipal Power Association, do something similar to what we do. Looks a little different, but for us, we're basically on site for 1.5 days. So tomorrow will be a very busy day for us, where we hope to be speaking to as many folks as we can who have some role in the operations and function and governance of the utility. We'll wrap up about noon, early afternoon on the second day. And at that point, Tim and I will have literally dozens of pages of notes, observations, and we will then, on the airplane and in the days after, we'll be merging our thoughts, seeing if we have common sources of agreement, seeing where we have disagreement, seeing if there's gaps in our understanding, where we need to collect additional data or speak with staff further about where we need to go with that. And our goal is to turn around what usually is a 50 to 70 page report within about 4 to 5 weeks of that time. And obviously, given the organizations, we expect most of them, and I think in every case, that's always been the case, it's a public document. We certainly write it with the idea that it will be written for public consumption. And it's an opportunity then for staff to evaluate, review, disagree. I mean, certainly we don't always capture a sentiment correctly, and we certainly want to understand where there are disagreements. In some cases, it may reflect disagreement that exists between staff or between board members and staff. But what we're really hoping it does is it creates an opportunity for dialogue about what are the key steps to take going forward. When we look at this, and I'm on slide 9 now, the focus on the full range of business processes. I talked about one of the hallmarks of our process is to try and look at it systematically and not try and come in and look at electric supply in and of itself and how that may or may not impact with other aspects of the operations. So we've identified these 12 areas, and we think for the most part,
Could I ask,
I'm sorry.
Could I ask a question, sir?
Certainly.
I've gone back and I'm just referring to your slide on what is an organizational checkup. and you've indicated that that you actually use a kind of a 360 process. You look at the utility itself, you look at the customer base, you look at, in this case, whoever represents the general fund, joint action agency, and then a state association, all of which we have. So what I'm wondering is, what's your process for engaging with our customer base, with the representatives of our general fund, our joint action agency, and our state association? Because I don't see that represented on your slide here.
Well, typically, the first thing we'll do is find out what kind of market research has occurred when it comes to the customer. And in some cases, there hasn't been any done for years. And so at that point, we're relying more on anecdotal feedback. Tell us what does the customer think of you? Do they like you? Do they not like you? What are the things they least like about your survey? If we do have customer survey data, we obviously would like to fold that in and understand what's been said. What are the issues that have come out? If there've been done several over time and we can track that longitudinally, are things getting better? Are things getting worse? If there's not a customer survey that is in any way relevant, either because it's never been done or it's simply too old, that would certainly be one of our recommendations. We think any utility of any size should be making some effort to try and close that distance between themselves and the customer. And I think by... Oh, we could certainly do that. It's not built into it's not built into our current scope of work, but it's certainly something that we do, and we'd be happy to talk about that with you. We've been doing market research, really since Hometown was formed, and I didn't want to presuppose that we're coming in to do that before we found out.
That's fine.
What's happening. In terms of the Joint Action Agency. We've had some conversation with the Joint Action Agency already. We'll probably have follow-up conversation after we've been on site. The State Association, I think I'd kind of like to understand sort of the legislative landscape to see if we do need to have that conversation with your State Association.
I would think a phone call, certainly.
Oh, absolutely,
You could be able to arrange, could you not?
Absolutely, yep. With the general fund operations, if we can get staff, not knowing exactly what's in the general fund and what's in the utility fund right now, it would be important for us to not only talk to the city manager, but if there are department heads in general fund operations, we really would like to have their input as well as part of that merging of information and data. And in terms of the governing process, this is certainly an opportunity now, but either via lunch with interested members or phone calls afterwards, it's very important for us to get input from governing board members as well in terms of what that looks like.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Chair, about the general fund representatives, since isn't that a city council function?
Well, yeah, I believe that, and I'm still trying to take this in here. Certainly, I think the city council should be included in this process at some point. It was always sort of my idea that as I looked ahead, part of the reason why we're doing this was, at least it was my thinking, was to involve the city council at a higher level so that they would have more understanding exactly how critical the utility at Dale Parent Light was to the operation of the city, and how it was a complicated situation. It's a complicated business, and it needs some care and tending, and it needs some understanding from the elected city council. So certainly I think that they should be included in, as we go forward with you all's survey and you all's trying to understand us, if you will. And of course compare that against your experience in other places and see what's the best operating practice.
Well, we place a high premium on inclusiveness, and in some cases, it's simply the constraints of time available that don't allow us to do as much as we would like. But we frequently, if the time constraints during our time on site are such that a follow-up phone call makes sense, absolutely. I mean, we would enjoy pursuing that opportunity.
Well, certainly don't limit your scope of inquiry to the amount of time you have on the ground. because certainly if there are areas that you believe are important to delve into and to understand those kind of relationships better, we certainly are going to accommodate you to take care of that.
Very much appreciate that.
Okay.
And very much appreciate, your candor as well. I mean, it's important for us to know, if there's the, 600-pound elephant in the corner that no one's telling us about, we're going to arrive and we're going to leave, and we'll never even know it existed. I mean, so our best work comes when staff and the governing board are candid, and share with us, here's my concern. This isn't working the way I want it to, or, I don't think we have a good enough understanding of this. So I think it's important that those opportunities for participation be there, and certainly we will make them available, if not on site, via the phone.
Thoughts, sir?
There's an hour-and-a-half session Wednesday on governance. That'd be a good time for city council to attend. It's short notice, but if not, we could do a follow-up call.
And some of the concerns there really are around just the notification around public meetings, and so sometimes it's not intended to get around public meetings and quorums as much as it's just the expediency of how do we get input without having to force you all go through what may or may not be a cumbersome process for scheduling and announcing a public meeting.
Could you repeat when that is?
Wednesday morning, I think about 10 o'clock.
Where?
Across the hall.
And that is a public meeting? You call that
No,
a
it's not a public meeting.
I'm
It's a
sorry.
section involved with the organizational checkup called governance that
Okay.
we could include city council in on.
That'd be great.
Well, certainly that would be maybe a good opportunity for city council members, or you might want to make these people available to them at some other time. I don't know.
If there's a scheduling conflict, we can always do a conference
Sure.
call later.
Okay.
And Jason, when was our last customer survey taken?
We had one done in the spring, actually.
So
We
we'll
can
be able
provide them that data.
we'll be able to utilize that data, and that would be great.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. Any other questions before I move on?
Any questions?
Good questions. I appreciate those.
Thank you.
And let me move on quickly too then, but the slide 9, that those are basically the various pieces that we try and drill into to understand the various points. And frequently, like customer service is one that will often have a general fund component to it, and we'll find out more while we're here. Or for instance, accounting, finance, and administration. So to the degree that we can get both the voices inside the utility fund as well in the general fund, I think that'll be important for us. And of course, the kind of crosstalk and the opportunities, we certainly don't want a line of people coming through that when the next one comes, people leave. We would like staff or governing board members to feel comfortable being there for whatever period of time or whatever discussions are taking place, because of the opportunity for people who may not interact with each other in their day-to-day work to perhaps understand how they affect each other in a way that they didn't. And the one I will cite that we don't always get these epiphanies at utilities, but was an opportunity when we had the customer service function, which was in the general fund, located down in City Hall, in the meter reading shop, which was out at the utility several miles away. Both were talking about the meter reading process, and the customer service folks did not fully understand the move that the meter shop had gone to automated meter reading. And they had no idea that they were out there reading every day and that data was being downloaded every day when they're set their little computer handhelds in the cradle. And it all of a sudden opened up opportunities in terms of billing cycles, the speed at which bills were processed and sent out. These folks never had talked to each other about how the work of the meter shop was affecting the customer service function. So those kind of opportunities, while don't always happen, I think the likelihood of them happening go up as if we have folks in there talking and sharing how their processes impact and are impacted by other functions within the utility or within the general fund.
The example you just cited, is that just an example from a previous client, or
Yes.
you've talked, okay.
Yep, that was from a client that simply they had no idea what was going on in each other's operations. The slide with the little stars on it, we started, probably 5 years ago, we started doing a star rating. Prior to that, it was just a written report, and folks like to have that star rating that very quickly allowed people, governing board members, members of the public, to sort of see where Hometown Connections thought the specific utility excelled. 4 stars, would be, in our impression, an operation that's doing extremely well and doing virtually, everything right, or lots and lots of things right. 3 stars is with great inflation, 3 stars is kind of average, and folks are, somebody who's getting 3 is doing well, and 2 stars are ones that we are sort of flagging that says, we've seen better. We've seen folks address this more effectively than you have, and often those will be the ones where some of our more significant recommendations will reside in, also under those 2-star ones. So I mentioned the report. This is just a sample report on strengths we would try for each of our each of our areas that we look into, to highlight the strengths within that function. Be it customer satisfaction, or under community outreach, good communications, or a strong website. And so we'll certainly point out all the strengths we can, because our goal is certainly not to come in and point fingers at individuals. And that's one of the reasons why we place an emphasis on the processes that are in place, and the business systems, because in many cases, in most cases, it's not an individual that is responsible for things not perhaps working as well as they could, as much as it is asking them to function within a system that may not be optimal for them to do that job in. Similar thing on the improvement side, you might see under customer service, the revenue cycle, late pay penalties. A lot of folks don't have clearly spelled out policies on how to deal with late payments. Their shut-off policies, their deposits policies, you might see something on that. Rates, clearly you guys are in the middle of some very significant rates issues right now. And, in working with UFS, we certainly will defer to them in terms of more specific rate recommendations and suggestions. And so what we hope we would be doing with rates is echoing some of the major points that they would be doing there. So again, it's probably, we're looking at 50 to 70 pages. It'll be a combination of narrative, best practices we've seen elsewhere, combined with recommendations and where we see strengths and weaknesses occurring within that. I think, Tim, you wanted to pick it up at this point? There's just one more slide? Yeah, go ahead. Any other questions on the...
Yes, I have a question on the Hometown Danville schedule. Are you there yet?
Yep, I'm going to let Tim wrap this one up.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Steve, and good questions. I just wanted to lay out the timeline of what we've agreed to do and within the scope. Within this, again, as mentioned, we're on site the next 2 days. I would like to also extend the opportunity, even if it's individually, to have lunch or something, get together for breakfast as far as with the governing body side, because it's always good for us to get that take from the governing body side, and not phone interviews are fine afterwards. As Steve mentioned, it's going to take us 4 to 5 weeks to be able to get the draft report together, just the process we go through. Our goal is to have a draft report back to staff on January 9th for the staff's review. As Steve mentioned, it's critical for us, for staff to be able to see it, and for accuracy purposes, making sure we didn't misinterpret something. We'll have blanks in there too, in certain areas that we just will not, we either disagree on what we heard, or we just glossed over that one, for example, because we cover so much. So we'll make sure we get all that wrapped up, and then by January 30th is the report being final. We'll be back out then on February 2nd to present the results of that. Steve just took you through a couple of our sample slides on the presentation of that report. And then we're also going to help kick off your strategic planning process at that point. As Steve mentioned, with this really being the foundation, the strength and weakness analysis should be a good launching pad into that strategic planning, and we'll facilitate and bring a process in that we've proposed and facilitate that dialogue with staff and the city council, whomever's going to be involved in that process, which again, we'd like to have in the governing body side involved in that process to the extent possible. So that's what we're looking at as far as a timeline going forward. We know you're on a tight timeline with this, with your steering committee and the assessment, I think, being wrapped up by end of February is our understanding. So we're working hard to stay within that timeline and within those confines.
So on January the 9th, your schedule is to report to, present a draft to staff, a draft to report to the Danville staff.
Yes, it'll just be electronic. Yeah, we'll send that electronically, and we'll have dialogue between now and then as well on clarifying questions after we leave. But electronic, we'll have an electronic draft and just a Word document to staff for their review of that.
In order to review it and to make any changes or recommendations or?
Yes, and we really seek the clarity side within that, just making sure that we didn't misrepresent, misquote something.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have a question?
Then the full review
Fred?
is February 6th.
Fred.
Do you see any purpose or any reason to include the chairman or a couple of members of the utility steering committee on the January 9th draft report?
That's purely up to you all. Whoever wants to be in that review process is fine with us. Mr.
Chairman, do you?
I was, the reason why I asked that question, and I didn't want to really take up a lot of time with that tonight, we're going to have a discussion about this, I'm sure, Wednesday about 10:30 or 11 o'clock, I'm sure, when we have an opportunity to talk again on Wednesday this week. But certainly that's why I asked the question about exactly what we were going to get on January the 9th. Certainly the steering committee should be included in those conversations and see what that draft report is, be privy to it, and I'm sure Mr. King is going to be happy to do that. Is that correct, Mr. King? Sure, we'll participate in that.
The other question I had, or statement, your slide, fully summarizes the focus on full range of business processes. That particular slide, there was a mention of the gorilla in the room, and there is certainly a gorilla in the room, at least, well, it's the purpose this committee got assigned is being members of the Utility Commission and City Council. Obviously, I'm just stating the obvious, but I want you to understand how important it is for at least, well, all of us, but these three guys here, the three of us and 6 others like us are really concerned with regard to the cost and the efficiency of providing power and the resulting rates. So those are things that we are dealing with more so than we ever have, and they are the gorilla in the room, along with the advice and understanding that you can provide us with regard to the rate of return for our utility, and the general fund transfer that we use is resembling the rate of return for the stakeholders of the utility. And of course, we continue to be challenged with what cash reserves are to be used with, elected officials more so than the Utility Commission. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that in the report. So the gorilla actually is in the room, and it's 4-headed, and those are the 4 heads.
Yes, and we do address all those. Those are common concerns, common questions, and common challenges that we see across all utilities this day and age, because the business has changed, and we definitely address that as far as return on investment. We like to see comparisons of that. If you just had an investor-owned utility, we draw comparisons to that, what the franchise fee would be, as an example. We love to see on the cash reserve side, we like to see cash reserve policies. Of course, you hear a lot of that, I'm sure. If not already, you will from Utility Financial Solutions, from Don. We'll make sure that that's in line with them, but we always like to see policy in those areas. And we're not big on policy just for the sake of policy. But the 3 areas we do like to see policy in, and if they're not here, we will recommend such. One is rates, that you have a rates policy, that so it doesn't become as political driven as much as business driven. And we also like to see a cash reserve policy, talking about at least what the floor is, so you've got a healthy financial a floor to be able to rely on during those rough times. And then the third area is the payment in lieu of taxes or the transfer to the general fund. And so we'd like to see policy in those three areas, all of which you hit on right there. So those are three core areas within this report that you'll see information back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, so I appreciate the very thorough outline that you've provided of the deliverables of the assessment. We need a strategic plan. And I see one bullet which talks about what the deliverables are associated with the strategic planning process. So could you outline further what you expect to be able to facilitate and what the outcomes and deliverables would be?
Good question.
Thank you.
What we've included in our scope for the strategic planning side, besides the SWOT analysis, as Steve referenced, which you'll have with this portion of it, which is a core component of the strategic plan, and what we offered to do within the scope is facilitate a day dialogue with, I'm assuming, with the City Council, the Utility Commission, and staff as it relates to the direction the utility's going. And we've submitted a process to staff as of what that would look like. Now, will we come away with a strategic plan at that one-day facilitation? No, we won't. But at least the foundation will be laid and the skeleton will be in place, if you will, and the meat can be put on the bones later along that. But we'll have some good dialogue, and as part of that, what we like to do is we like to go through visioning and values exercise, and we think it's very important for the governing body to be included in that as far as where do we want to be in 10 years. Whatever the magical date is, it's typically 10 years that we'll see, and stick a stake in the ground and say, here's where we want to be in 10 years. What are the values? Are the values of the utility still aligned with your customer values? And that's always important. So we'll go through that as well. And so when you see there the vision, value, mission, and then we'll get into that same day, we'll get into what those critical issues are, many of which we're already going to understand as far as going through this process on the front end. Right. But still, there may be some that crop up that, on the city side that haven't yet been communicated to the utility side that would come up during that discussion as well, in conjunction with what had already been developed through the SWOT analysis. And then it'll be up to staff, and we can come back in and help if you need us to, but staff will be positioned at that point also to really then to get down and develop the goals, which in our mind, goals need to be specific, realistic, and measurable. Right. If not, they're not a goal, because if you can't measure it, how are you going to know the impact it's had? And so that's the process we'll take you through on the back end and take staff through on the back end of that. But again, what's included right now is because we work with utilities where we'll be, on site 3 different times, really training staff and taking staff through a strategic planning process with the deliverable on the back end. We didn't include that full set in our original scope to Danville at this point, but we can sure support that on the back end if you need us to, but at least the stage will be set with that February 3rd meeting and going through that process.
Mr. Chairman, what were your expectations in terms of this strategic planning effort?
I'm still digesting here. I thought we were going to have some more of some interaction among this group and possibly to be expanded also to the rest of the City Council at somewhere down the road where we would have a deeper understanding and sharing of what everybody's expectations were of Danville Power and Light. That was my hope, and I believe that Mr. Donahue's indicated that I'm not hearing that right now. That was my,
I believe,
just my personal sort of expectation here. I'd be very much interested in knowing what the members of the City Council there with us here, if they had any expectation or vision of that.
I think we got some clarification from the steering committee that in mid-February, when we're at a point where you have recommendations on large and small issues that may range from adjusting boundaries to considerations of delivering power from other sources to selling the utility outright, we certainly need a whole bunch of information to make that decision, but you don't develop a strategic plan until you know which of those options or combination of those options are going to be considered. A strategic plan for maintaining a municipal utility is going to be very different than one related to selling the utility. But what we've asked Hometown Connections to do first is concentrate on the organizational checkup. The strategic planning piece would come in January, and we've got time to respond to concerns about involvement by council, what form, involvement by the commission in what form, and our customers.
Well, if I heard this gentleman correctly, it sounds like February 3rd is a day-long session. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
So I think the interaction that Philip is looking for will occur on February 3rd. But from there, we should be in a position with critical issues to then do homework, Joe, and put some meat on the bone, so to speak, so that we can look at it from a business perspective, a values perspective, and then actually hopefully develop a plan. But develop a plan eyes wide open, understanding what the ramifications are potentially of some of the decisions that could be made. Is that fair?
Yes.
So that's fair to say.
Right.
So the February 3rd strategic planning meeting is more like a midpoint than it is the end of the process. Is that fair to say?
I'd say on the front end of the midpoint. Because
Even
really
better.
the heavy lifting on the strategic plan will occur when recommendations are discussed and adopted, and we have a path going forward. Then we flesh out the strategic plan and the kind of detail we need.
Thank you. Very good discussion. I think we all have an understanding now where we're headed.
Yep.
Fred?
I agree with you with one exception. With regard to your sample, your report that you'll be filing prior to that, you'll be looking, I mean, you've got a list of things, but will it basically address internal efficiencies that may be helpful for the utility to be more rate competitive, or will that not be part of the report?
Well, your rate competitiveness, I think, is coming from UFS.
Well,
Is it?
I think it is.
Okay.
I'm worried. They're really looking at rate structure. I'm trying to figure out who's going to be looking at internal operations that could find efficiencies that could help us, however small, could help us with our rates. And I'm not seeing who's doing that.
We're looking to Hometown Connections, understanding there are different altitudes here. In some things, it's not everything being done at the same altitude. If they see an opportunity, let's just use as an example, and don't have any notion that this is what they might discover, that we have that our electric crews are too large. Based on what they've seen and all the electric utilities they've looked at, we have too many people on our normal crews. They may say that deserves more attention. So we may together drill down and determine, well, what if we change the crew size? And how much would that save in our operational costs? So I see them bringing all this experience and exposure they've had to all these different utilities in the organization checkup to be able to help us determine where are the opportunities for cost savings while continuing to meet the customer needs. And to the extent that has a beneficial impact on rates, we can determine what kind of process, almost absent any consideration of whether we keep the utility or sell the utility, what kind of process would we have to go through to make adjustments to reduce the operating costs. And I appreciate your qualification, however large or small, because we all understand For the electric utility, the cost of operation is driven enormously by the cost of power. And it's 65, 70%.
70%.
And we'd love the opportunity. We can bring AMP back and describe in more detail or do a webinar or something, so you get a better understanding of how we buy power, how that power is scheduled and delivered, so you get a sense of comfort. Are we getting the power at the cheapest cost? I believe we are, but I don't want to just set that aside and say there's no improvement that can be made on that, because a 10% improvement on the cost of power is going to go a lot further than fine-tuning on our operational costs, given the size the power represents in that. And we've already been exposed to information about the power generation projects that are in line. We're talking with AMP about the possibility, and I'd hate to put a percentage on it, but it looks good for them to put a peaking power generation facility in our jurisdiction on our side of the meter, which means for that peaking piece of our power needs, we could buy power from them at a much lower cost than other options. So all those things together could have an impact. And so I don't know, I'm kind of meandering a bit here, but I think I see Hometown Connections, even in the short amount of time they're going to spend in the organizational checkup, because of their experience and exposure to all these other utilities, to be able to spot pretty quickly where are the real opportunities for operational cost savings. And then we can drill as deeply as we need to into those areas.
Correct.
And the survey information that was done in the spring is pretty sobering. And so I don't think we're getting A+ from our customers. And so we need to address that. And we look at these, I thought you were going to say the elephant in the room was the significantly higher rate for large industries.
Well, that's part of the rates I was talking about.
Than the other utilities we're comparing ourselves with, and that's an issue we need to be thinking about. The Utility Financial Services preliminary assessment that they shared with us last week was the cost of service is pretty close. The cost we're calculating for cost of service and reflecting on our rates is pretty close to the actual experience. So there's not likely to be a solution in the current rate study to that disparity, but we still have a huge differential. We're really more like a rural electric co-op in the challenge we have with 500 square miles, 40% of our customers being in rural areas. Those kinds of things make us more like a rural electric co-op than they do a municipal where all the service territory is contained in an urban area. But I think Hometown Connections, and we look to maintain a long-term relationship with this group, is going to be helpful to us to spot those operating savings areas and tell us where we need to examine more in greater depth.
Mr. Turpin?
As you mentioned, Mr. King, the key, I think, is what we're paying for our wholesale power costs and all this. Would Hometown be the one to recommend that we perhaps need more expertise in acquiring the power at the lowest rate, such as a consulting firm that specializes in that area, or is that something we're going to have to decide?
Well, I think we need to know more about exactly what AMP does in that regard before deciding or before assuming that we're not getting the power at the lowest possible cost. And we probably don't want to go on and on this particular subject, but I can tell you that AMP for us and every other of the 150-plus members they have, they do a load profile, and they determine what our power needs are in those categories we've talked about, base load, intermediate, and peaking. And they track our consumption by season of the year and time of day, and they can tell us very accurately how much power our customers are going to need from us in those categories. And then we go out on the competitive market, and they have some considerable expertise within AMP, and they've recently, by recently I mean the last couple of years, they've acquired additional expertise, and they go out and competitively procure those strips of power for their customers. And I can assure you that it's at the lowest cost available on the market at the time. And we lock into those strips, and they can be 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, or they can be 5 days a week, 10 hours a day, or they're customized. They have traditional products out there on the market, but they'll issue a competitive procurement request, and there'll be several suppliers. And the electricity, in this day and age, is a commodity, and it's sold by companies like Duke, and it's sold by Goldman Sachs and commodity traders, just like any other commodity. Yeah. And there's no way around the market and what the prices are, and it's just a matter of being as long range as we possibly can be on how much to balance out in acquisition of generation assets versus how much risk to put on the market. But I'm convinced that AMP is doing a very good job, and probably nobody could do better to get us the power at the lowest possible cost. But they need to help us better understand exactly how that works, and they'd be happy to come and focus on that. We didn't get that in the discussion with them when they were here.
You know, we've talked about getting the other council members involved, and sometimes they do come to these and sit in the audience, but is the time to get everybody here at the February 2nd meeting, to present your results, all the council members and all the utility members?
That is fine with us.
Is that the time
that would be a good time as far as to get that strong dose of what the report revealed, and then that February 3rd meeting to have that strategic dialogue.
Mm-hmm. So we should highly recommend that they come to the February 2nd meeting to hear your presentation.
That would be great.
Certainly. I agree 100%. That is going to be the meeting that everybody needs to be here, and they need to get a copy, and they need to think about what we're doing here. Yeah. For sure. And they should all be invited, and we'll...
And the utility members.
Yes.
That would be great.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, just a couple comments.
Yes, sir, Mr. Tony.
When I look at the assessment that you're going to conduct, there's another elephant in the room, although it's a smaller one, but it's really hurt faith in the utility department. And unfortunately, we've had some illegal activities by a small number of employees that have resulted in fairly substantial financial issues occurring. So when I look at the fact that you're going to be looking at administration and accounting, governance, human resources, I think that that's a very beneficial part of this assessment, because I think it is important that actions do be taken to restore confidence in the utility's ability to act as a service organization. So I do expect that we'll see some observations come out of that about how we might be able to bring some better best practices in.
Stephen mentioned the customer-centric part of this process, and we pride ourselves on that. How does this impact the customer? And the staff's going to hear that both from the general fund and the utility side. They're going to hear that a lot in the next 2 days from us. So how does that impact the customer when we talk about these various areas? The other thing we'll talk about is what's the culture today? What's the culture of the utility? And, you know, it sounds like that culture may not be bad necessarily, but it sounds like that at least the public's eyes, it's been marred a little bit in the past. So to your point, how do you restore that? And so that we will definitely have a lot of discussion around that.
The other thing that might be beneficial to dig into, you know, when we talk about our inability to serve, you know, large general service customers, that really comes down to the utility's mission. What's the utility's mission in life? What is it really going to excel at? And I think that's really something that's important. And I think if you can do a good job of helping us define that on February 3rd with City Council, and I would hope that we have good representation from City Council on the 3rd as well, to the 2nd, and get some cohesiveness there, that really can help that decision-making process greatly. Maybe that's not a business that we should be in. And maybe we need to make some decisions about that.
One thing is for sure, you can't be everything to everybody.
No.
And it's, to your point, that's where your strategic planning process, that's where those things need to be talked about within that.
And I think Joe's analogy earlier of our being more like a rural co-op in many respects at the tail end of PJM, you know, with really only one organization that could help us that's based out of Northern Ohio. But it's the best we can do because, like it or not, we can't do anything about the PJM border, and we're not in a position to tap into resources south of the border. So we have to do the best we can.
And I will say that there's definitely a migration towards joint action agencies today versus a departure. And the reason I state that is because, to Joe's point earlier, with deregulation, the wholesale market's changed substantially. And I'm sure you all see that as far as on your utility commission and how it's impacted your utility. And that's why you're seeing people like AMP. I mean, those organizations grow so tremendously over the last 10 years is because of the changes in the marketplace. Doesn't mean, though, that you shirk all responsibility and accountability and, you know, put 100% on AMP to take care of your power supply. I mean, the utility has a role within that. We'll be asking those questions at a high level. And, you know, what oversight does the utility have and what's the utility's involvement in those decisions? And it comes back to, I think Joe referred to it, you know, when you get on the power supply side, it's what's your risk tolerance? And, you know, you need a strategic plan just in the power supply side because, as Joe also mentioned, 60 to 80% of a customer bill, every utility we worked with, 60 to 80% of that customer's bill is power supply and transmission. And so it's not taking anything away from the distribution side of it, but it gets to be a small portion when you look at you know, trying to cut staff or cost control just on the distribution impact side of it. And that's the closest thing to your customer. So you have to be careful. And I'm not placing judgment that that's what you're looking at doing, but we see utilities and we see city councils sometimes get caught up in that we need to cut costs. You know, we need to, now it's always great, and that's what our role is in this process, is to look for efficiencies and to be able to share best practices of what we see going on with other utilities, and we will definitely do that.
Well, you'll see in our power profile versus our current demand and current demand projection, we only have flexibility with perhaps 1/3 of our power supply. Unless we were to make significant decisions such as divesting from future hydro, divesting from the Prairie State investment, which, as long as it runs, is a very good investment for the utility long-term. But 1/3 is 1/3. There's still a lot that can be done with that component.
Yeah, very much so.
Does anybody have anything else? Any further questions? Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is comments from the public. The next item on our agenda is closing comments from any steering committee members that may have a comment to close with. Mr. Shanks?
No, I appreciate you gentlemen, actually, yes. Appreciate your presentation today. I'm looking forward to your report. I think you've got a very full understanding of where we are and the information we need your report to include, and I look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Dr. Miller?
Echo that. Thank you for coming. It's a good presentation. Looking forward to the report.
I'm good, thanks.
Bill?
I'm good, thank you.
I'd like to say that I appreciate you all coming today. I want to thank Jason and Joe for
Good job.
taking this journey with us. We made a lot of progress today, and for those of you who are watching, that are going to watch this on TV, some of the things that have happened in the previous meetings were very interesting, and they were land grabbing, and they were about gossipy kinds of things. What we started tonight was, to me, the most important part of this process, which is to think about the organization of Danville Power and Light, its relationship to its customers, its relationship to its shareholders, its owner, and its relationship to its competitors and its suppliers. And I've been around here a while, and we really need to stop and take a close look at these relationships as we see where Danville Power and Light is going forward. And I do not have a dog in this fight. I just want to make sure that we take a close look at what we're doing to make sure that it's effective and efficient, and it's providing a value to the city of Danville, to all the citizens of the city of Danville. So thank you very much.
We meet on the 15th?
We will decide when we're going to meet.
Why
Let's
not,
decide.
why not decide now then?
Because the 9th is the day you're going to get that report back, and I don't have a calendar. So I don't know what day you want to call that.
Yeah,
December 15th. I thought we weren't going to meet on December 15th.
well,
That's what he's asking.
is that the
We didn't have a
consensus?
meeting.
So next meeting's January 5th.
That's fine, just want to make sure we're all on the same
You have
page.
a presentation again.
No.
No,
No.
that's fine.
Okay.
Information is good, education is good. Oh, I'll put my mic up already. But at some point, we need to be discussing what we have received. And I guess I'm saying somehow we gotta decide where we go before we plan how to get there.
I appreciate that. Now, my understanding of what I've heard today is that we are going to find out where we think we're going to go when we get that January 9th draft report from Hometown Connections. And the way this thing has been set up, where we are now, Mr. Gilstrap, it seems to me that that's what we're waiting for. And on January the 9th, we're going to set up a day when we can get as many people together as we can around that January 9th draft report when it shows up in Danville. And that's why I'm saying about January the 15th when we're going to meet. I think we should take a little poll of the people that we need to have and make sure we can have a good turnout for that. And you all can have it in a place where you want to deal with it. And you may not want to do it on the 9th or the 10th. You might want to look at it first and do your due diligence, and then we can do that. That's why I'm not willing to commit to a day today, because we don't know exactly how that's going to work.
I was confused about the December the 15th meeting, and the decision
Excuse
is
me.
not to meet on December 15th.
Well, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
We had already, Jason and I already talked about that. At least that was my understanding.
It wasn't sure yet, though. I mean, we haven't discussed it, so.
Yeah.
So our next meeting is January the 5th,
Right,
the
That's what
steering
you've got
committee.
planned.
Okay.
right. That's the steering.
Right.
And
Okay?
is that a good meeting to address the councilman's question about, we have a lot of information that's been compiled ahead of time, to perhaps get that distilled down to what we view as being important, sir?
That's exactly it. At some point in time, we need to start discussing among ourselves all this information
Okay.
and exactly what, all of our options are.
Do you want the staff to prepare us a list? Or how do you?
Well, I don't think the staff needs to prepare us a list. I mean, they've provided us a lot of information,
Okay.
and we've got more information coming. For us to reach our goal to bringing this to some sort of conclusion,
Right.
we among ourselves needs to start siphoning through that information and the pros and cons of all the different options.
Okay. Let me ask you, what is the program for the 5th of January?
We don't have a program. It's up to
Okay.
the committee.
All right. Do we need to do that now, John? Do you think the 5th of January would be a good day for us to do this? We have an open date with no program.
I just think we need to start doing it.
Okay.
The 5th is fine with me. I do think we need to have everyone present, if possible.
When you say everyone, you're not just talking about this.
No, I'm talking about just this
The
steering
6
committee.
of us, okay?
We're the one that received all the information.
Okay.
And that would allow us to do that. If we did it at that date, it would be before the assessment results.
Right.
So we would be able to arrive at our
Right.
summary independently of that.
Mr. Turpin, did you also?
And give us some additional knowledge of what we should be looking for from the 9th report
Right.
and follow up with them.
Great.
Mr. Turpin, you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't believe the report the hometown is going to provide us is going to address in the scope that John is talking about. I think there's more, we're going to have to do more too than what they provide.
Fred, did you have?
Yeah, since we're setting that agenda, or at least discussing that agenda for January 15th, I'd like to go back and include in discussion the 4 charts that compared the rates of Danville utilities versus the various competitors and various levels of service. This chart.
And
Let me ask you another
that chart's
question,
going
John.
to change monthly.
John, let me ask you another question.
Yeah.
Would you rather do this on December the 15th? Since we've got an open date? Huh?
Bill
Oh, I'm
can't
sorry.
be here on the
I didn't hear
15th.
that
I'm
part.
sorry.
Okay.
Apologize.
So January 5th.
I've got a retirement up in Richmond.
We'll be talking between now and then about what we're going to put on this agenda, and we'll have some conversations about it.
Good.
We'll try to do some emailing and think about making sure we don't leave anything out, if that's all right with you all. Okay?
Great.
Does anybody else have anything to say? All right. Well, then I will adjourn this meeting and wish everybody a Merry Christmas and very, very happy holiday.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.